Thank you both for joining us. I'm going to start with Paul. Paul is a senior advisor to the Collective Impact Forum and a fellow in residence. I always wanted to be a fellow, maybe someday. A fellow in residence at the Social Innovation and Impact Center at Georgetown. For those of you who don't know Paul, he's the former CEO of Public Allies, where he spent 24 years helping more than 5,600 diverse young leaders turn their passions into making a difference into careers and working for community and for social change. Now, Paul, you've actually written a book on leadership called Everyone Leads. And those of you who were here last year had the pleasure of hearing Paul talk about the culture of collective impact. And maybe a good place to start is just, for you to react a little bit to, what we put out on the table as effective system leadership from your perspective and your experience.
Well, I think that the key, and I think it came up last night in the conversation, I think in light of what you talked about, that, the sixth element of this is leadership. And, when I talk about culture, for example, one of the things leaders do is create a culture. And the question is, as a leader, how do you create a culture for success and collective impact? And I think it requires, it does require a different, I think if we take the same leadership we use to build an individual organization, and we don't shift that way of leading to think about how we lead collectively, and we don't make that intentional leap, and then we'll still do things the same ways, and we'll break down into the same behaviors we had before. So I think we have to intentionally shift behaviors, shift the ways we lead, and it requires this kind of new way of looking at things. And I was kind of struck again by, I love the simplicity of open mind, open heart, open will. And I think that if one can lead a group to be able to collectively do those three things, and to create a culture in which people feel that they can be vulnerable enough to do those three things, where they feel that they can kind of make that shift in how they lead and how they behave. I think that's where it starts.
So you ran Public Allies for 21 years, a nonprofit, and I think Public Allies has always been interested in collaboration in the community, but as a leader of a very successful nonprofit, was there a switch for you from thinking about sort of organizational leadership to thinking about the health of the whole? Did that happen, or were you talk a little bit about that?
Well, so everything we did in collaboration. So for those who don't know Public Allies, and I'm grateful to have some colleagues in the audience, but what we did is we recruited young people, primarily young people of color, young people from low-income backgrounds, who had a passion to make a difference, and provided them year-long apprenticeships at local nonprofits in their community and 43 weeks of leadership training to help them turn that passion into careers working for community and social change. And we did this in 23 cities around the country, and so we placed people in over 600 organizations a year. So it's hard to be focused inwardly when you rely on partnerships with 600 organizations a year just to deliver your mission. And in light of those partnerships, we started figuring out in communities, and part of how we got to collective impact ourselves was that we started partnering with groups and communities where we realized that there were these things going on and that they needed lots of people. And we started seeing how we had to think differently of not just placing people in individual placements, but figuring out how could we use this human capital force we were building collectively to actually influence things. And so I think there was that, and then I think at the other level, we focused a lot. Our big issue with Public Allies was the diversity of the nonprofit sector and its leadership. And so we felt that we had to always operate in seeing and advocating on the whole, and the frankly atrocious statistics we still have as a sector in terms of our inclusion, in terms of our leadership. And so we felt to create opportunity for the young people we were bringing into the pipeline, we had to also address and advocate and write about and speak about and work on the larger issue of inclusion in the sector if we were going to succeed.
Great, thanks. So I've got more questions for you, but I want to get Stacy into the mix. So Stacy Holland, for 20 years, has served as a passionate advocate, helping youth in the Philadelphia region have academic career and support services to build a brighter future. She currently serves as the executive director of the Lenfest Foundation, supporting disadvantaged youth in Philly. But Stacy was the co-backbone leader of various incarnations, but we'll talk, I'll talk specifically about Project U-Turn, which is a collective impact effort in Philadelphia that FSG actually spent a lot of time studying and published, and has really become an inspiration to people around the world for collective impact. So Stacy's sort of currently in a role as a funder. She was a backbone leader, started her career, founded a nonprofit. So maybe Stacy, I'd love to hear from you, talk a little bit about the shift in your thinking. I mean, and where you are today is, it's all about the health of the whole. It's all about the collective. Is that where you started, or did you go through some sort of transition?
That is a therapy question. So on our team, as was just mentioned, our organization, we had a co-presidency. I was co-president and COO. My co-founder was co-president and CEO. And we did that very intentionally at the beginning of the organization. One, because we believe fundamentally change happens in communities. Our mission was how do we connect as many young people to the economy as possible. And the only way to do that was through an elaborate network of other nonprofit organizations. And also we figured out very simply that we were in a very segregated city. And my co-founder is not African American, she's African white. And we decided we wanted to make a statement. We wanted to say to our community, change can only happen if we work together. We also wanted to say we all have gifts and talents that are very different, and all the gifts and talents are needed to co-create or co-construct a solution. And lastly, we wanted to present a leadership front that was united. I was the builder on the team, so I'm the nerd. I'm the nerd that my partner really was the face of the organization, and she is fundamentally brilliant, one of the most transformational systems leaders I think of our time, and has been absolutely magnificent at building and constructing these very elaborate campaigns. My job was to kind of sit behind her, and when she'd say something, oh yeah, we want 10,000 kids in summer jobs. Okay. And figure out, okay, 10,000, if I start with one in North Philly and I go get another one in South Philly, and maybe if I put them together, we'll have a system. So my job was really to build the very thing that she was able to convince people that we needed. And as the builder, my shift is everything's controllable. If you can't measure it, it ain't so. Everything's linear, they come in order, and you are outlined. And that's a problem. And I would sit in these collaborative meetings, and literally for the first 2 years, I did not talk. That was my role. My role was to listen. To listen, build, behind the scenes, give the solution to her, the next collaborate, the next meeting, she would then talk about it. And so I was really the silent partner. So the shift happened fundamentally with one particular experience with a colleague on the collaborative who was, in my opinion, I called her mean. She was like the mean girl. She was very, very nasty. and she was angry. Angry at everything and everybody. And one day she was the youth advocate on the collaborative, and you all are laughing because you know that you have one. So one day she was attacking me over something that I was supposed to, that her perception was I hadn't responded to her. And I just got fed up, and I was like, you're a mean girl, and I need you to stop yelling at me. And she said, well, you are the most neutral, uninteresting, unresponsive human. I was like, wow. Did you really say that? And she's like, Stacy, I'm not mean, I'm mad. And the reason why I'm mad is I come to these meetings, and the very students that I represent, when I get back to my office, they're homeless, they can't go to school, they have no money, so I'm feeding them out of my own pocket. I need this to move faster. And the very thing that you were supposed to build is a solution I needed, and you did not respond. So for me, that was I was like, well, actually, We did build it, you just didn't know about it. So let me hear from you more. And I had to step back and hear that and say, you know what we do matters. What we say matters. What we say we're going to do matters. And it impacts people in very real time. And so that went to what I would say for me at the core of this, for leadership, is curiosity. Are you asking the right questions? Why is the most powerful word in our lexicon? Because when you keep asking why this, why do we do it this way? How come it has to be that way? Do you really believe that? Can we fix that this way? What if we looked at it this way? And as a leader, my shift happened because I realized my inaction was causing a reaction for someone who needed it, and the collaboration really didn't exist at that point. And so I had to fix myself and had to learn to ask a different set of questions, learn how to step back and be very respectful, learn how to be humble in that space. There is no answer when you walk in the room. There's only the opportunity to co-create. And most importantly, that you have to be self-reflective. You know, it is this mindfulness when you enter the space, because what you say matters, and someone is listening, and they really want to make sure that they have that solution so they can go back and serve their constituents.
Wow. So Paul, for those of you here last year, Paul has this great talk called The Culture of Collective Impact. I love, culture eats strategy for lunch, or breakfast, one of those. But Paul, you do this great bit, which is wonderful, because you talk about sort of, much as we're talking about here in system leadership, being open to your vulnerabilities and blind spots. And Paul does this thing where sort of, I guess he internally at his organization came up with this list of all the things Paul, suck at, and shared it with his team. And so, in the spirit of all the things you suck at, not to just bring that up, Paul, but I will. Talk a little bit about sort of, were there things, when you think about what it takes to be a system leader, were there things that you had to sort of acknowledge about yourself that you maybe needed to change in order to actually get the outcome that you were looking for, which was this whole, collaborative approach to change?
Yeah, so I do suck at a lot of things. And I should say that the moral of that story when I present it, it is a list of, and it's now become quite public. When I share it in these speeches, people take photos of the slide and tweet it. And I always think that's a little bit weird, because I'm feeling a little vulnerable putting it up, and then people are like, oh cool, and they're tweeting Paul Schmitz lists the things he sucks at. But the reason why I share it is because the things we suck at aren't a secret. And the whole point of that story is that in the sharing that list, we're always afraid. And then we realize everybody already knows it. And that we're the only ones who don't know it. Because we convince ourselves we're fooling everybody. So if we're always late, we make up an excuse every time. And we think the fact that we've had an excuse 50 times in 50 weeks, that no one just thinks we suck at being on time. And that when we actually acknowledge it, we open up the space for people to be honest and give us feedback. But it also, people know we are aware that we're always late. Then they might say to us, this meeting next week is really important. We really need you there early. Can you make sure you do it? And we're not defensive about it because we've owned that we suck at that. And so I think almost at a meta level, just opening yourself up to be able to admit, because as leaders we can't, and again, kind of where that comes in my presentation is just my biggest mistake as a leader in the first decade or so of my leadership was thinking I had to be able to be good at it all. And when I realized, as you did too, that I wasn't good at it all, then it meant, okay, then I have to hire people who are good at those things. I have to delegate and trust people who are good at those things to do those things, and I have to not do those things. And that was a real insight for me as a leader. And so, when you ask like what are things like, there's a lot of things that I've learned. But I think a big piece of it, there were things I learned I had to get better at, and there were things that I know are blind spots for me that I need to have people around me who are great at those things, so that they can both call me on them, but also kind of that phrase we use in public guys, we just drive into my blind spot and honk, and just let me know like you're in the space where you should not be, Paul. Like, get out of that space, shift lanes. This is my lane. Because as a leader, you often try veer into other people's lanes because you're worried and you're fearful and you want to make sure your success, and you kind of need people to honk and put you back in your lane. And so I think that self-awareness element is so critical. And again, I think when we can just own those things, and I always say we should have confidence about what we're good at, and humility about what we're not. And I think that opens up a real transformative relationship with people. And I think when we front about ourselves, we end up much more transactional. And we never allow that shift in relationship. And so it does take, that vulnerability to open, and authenticity to open other people. And if we're not doing that, and we're not opening ourselves, then other people won't open themselves to us. And I will just say, every time I do that presentation, people come up to me afterward and start talking about the things. I mean, literally the moment you share what you suck at, other people will share it back to you. It like literally just unlocks, because we all are fearful of talking about this stuff, especially with funders. And when we kind of open up about it, it actually allows us to have real relationships and get rid of all the pretense.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I never made this connection before, but you can take that to the organizational level. And we all know that in collective impact, one of the hardest steps, when we think about the 5 conditions, is mutually reinforcing activities. And if we can admit as an organization, we're not good at everything, right?
So in my presentations now, I do that. And I don't make people make a list of it, but I say that it's true. The same thing about individuals. It's the things that your organization sucks at, everybody knows. It's not a secret. If you run over everybody and take credit for things you shouldn't have, if you overclaim on your results, everybody knows. And the hard thing with collective impact is you get around the table and everyone knows what you suck at. And if you still pretend you haven't done those things, then you will not get to that transformative collaboration where you create that trust. And some of the process we have to go through is naming some of the elephants in the room and getting them out. And that means we have to own some of the stuff we know that our organizations have done, just as we have to do that as individual leaders, we have to do that as organizations. And we just have to understand and be very clear, none of it is a secret. If our staff is all white and we're working in a majority people of color community, everyone notices. And so if we pretend like we are thinking about racial equity, and we don't look at, everyone is looking at us and going. So we just have to remember, everyone knows. It's a lot easier if we just own it, and then that creates the opportunity to really change and talk about it and be transformative and authentic.
Yeah, wow, that's really great. Thank you. So here's a question for both of you. I think one of the things that we've learned as we've studied leadership in collaborative efforts and in collective impact is that for all of us, this journey from sort of individual to thinking about the health of the whole, it really is developmental. It's not something that, it's not like an on-off switch. It's more like a dimmer switch. We all sort of go through a period of progressive and transforming ourselves. And it's really hard to do in the absence of some help. And some of the help comes from others and other more accomplished system leaders who can be mentors for us. One of the things that's we found to be critically important is accessing tools. And as an example, Molly Baldwin in the video talked about peacekeeping circles as a really transformative experience for her. It's more of a restorative justice approach that really helped transform things for her. So there are these tools, and actually Paul and I are going to do a session after this and share 2 different tools that we found helpful as we think about sort of leading in systems change. But I'm curious if either of you could sort of identify, tool can be just, it can be a lot of different things, but were there certain events or certain types of approaches that helped you, get a little bit further down the road in thinking more about the health of the whole? Either of you.
I would say for me personally, there's two comments on it. Personally, it's always having a ritual of centeredness before you walk in the room, right? And so my ritual is I go in a corner, I say a prayer, I get very quiet and reflect on what it is that needs to accomplish, and ask very humbly, if I'm to be the vehicle today, please make that happen. The second ritual is being able to walk in the room, and automatically the first thing I try and do is find a leader, another organization in the room, and make them the center first and foremost as part of the meeting. Celebrate your colleagues. It is mission critical. And our phrase in Philly and U-turn was, "This is so not about you." It's not about you. And every once in a while, we have to remind each other, you do know your maker's about you, this is not about you, come back. The last comment I would make which is a ritual, is when you're in the room, and for us it was an issue of dropouts. And sometimes, as the leader, have to remind the group, did John get his issue solved today? Did Kim get back to school? Did Raheem get access to credit recovery? If the answer to that is no, we did not do our job, come back to the table. Being able to keep people centered on why you were there in the first place. And a lot of times we lose that because we're so busy trying to solve the problem and be the adult that we forget that we represent, for us it was young people, we represent a way forward and a life-changing transaction for them. And so that ritual for us is, how do we keep kids in the center so we keep ourselves focused and we don't get off track?
Paul?
Yeah, I mean, the first that comes to mind is that when we come to a table was learning that you build relationships with individuals, not organizations. And I know that sounds kind of simple, but when we get around a table, we introduce ourselves by our title and our organization, and immediately we now hold whatever biases we have about those organizations or those kinds of positions we hold about each other. And one of the things I learned over time was to really try and understand who people are before I understand even what they do. And that simple turn, and there's an activity I often do, and yesterday somebody did in New York, and I'll be doing it tomorrow afternoon in our group, but just there's ways you can start the conversation just by really getting to know what makes people tick beyond, and it's just the simple thing of just starting with the relationship and getting to know people before you even know what their organization is. And if you know the organization, trying to get them, because if we build a relationship, we start getting to know each other as people and our families and who we care about and what we love to do and all those kinds of things, it allows us to start building connection to see each other more three-dimensionally. And when we see each other only as positions and organizations, we see each other only two-dimensionally. And we have a more biased view. And if we can understand that third dimension, then it allows us to start building relationships that go beyond and start building trust. And so that for me has been a key thing and insight. And the other thing I'll just say is I had an executive coach for over a decade, and one of the things that she made me do, because I'm an introverted processor, was to always share my journey. Because I would walk into a meeting, and I had thought about something for 100 hours, and I would bring it to my team and expect them in 15 minutes to process what I had processed over 100 hours without having also taken them on any part of my journey. I started here. This is kind of the ladder of that brought me from my initial question to what I'm bringing here, and then giving them a day to think about it or something and then meet about it. I would come into a meeting having thought about it for 100 hours, having had 9 external conversations, and then I would bring an idea and expect the staff to react in 15 minutes and say yay or nay and then run. And so a tool that I learned and that my coach really worked with me on was just learning that when I sit down with a team, if I've spent a lot of time stewing on something, to walk people through my journey and then work with them to figure out what they need to be able to walk through the same journey before we make a decision, and not just assume that because, you know, I bring out a great idea like, hey, what do y'all think? And give them 15 minutes to think about something I thought about for 100 hours.
Systems change can only happen if the laws change the behavior. It is all about us. It is all about us. If you are the head of your foster care system and you know your system is horrible, change your behavior and lead your team differently. If you are in a nonprofit that does phenomenal work and is awesome, be willing to share that with someone else. If you are a funder and you're heavy-handed and you're not curious, you're not open, you're not intrinsically invested, you gotta change your behavior. The only way systems change is if we, the individuals, say, I could do this differently. And then you get Paul to say, I can do this differently. And John say, I can do this differently. And then change begins to happen. It's magic, it's beautiful. And you had the power all along. The issue is that the community, you never gave yourself permission to think differently. And so at the end of this, when your goal happens, when you achieve success, almost everyone around your table will tell a story about them that they as individuals are definitely different. I see the world differently. I function differently. I walk differently. I celebrate differently. I cry differently. Everything's different. And that's the story that you want to tell.
So I just got to name this moment because you described the paradox of collective impact in two of your responses. It's not about you, right? It's all about us. Yeah. Good. So I'm going to give Paul and Stacy, a chance to share some additional reflection, but we want to turn the conversation back to you. Can you flip to the next slide from back there, or do I need to do it? Okay. Great. So 2 questions here for you all to consider. And what I'd like you to do, again, being the junkie for silence that I am, is let's have you, spend a couple of minutes in silence reflecting on these questions yourself, and then I'll tell you when you can turn to the table and share. So the first question is, for you as an individual, what steps might you take to further develop your practice as a system leader? And the second is, for your collective impact effort, what changes might facilitate more collective leadership focused on the health of the whole? So let's take a couple of minutes of silence for you all to reflect on that for your particular efforts. And so I wonder, given that it's personal, if any of you in front of 250 people would be willing to share what came up at your table. You're back here? Yes. Somebody's volunteering back there. With great enthusiasm. It's Sherry. All right.
So I just want to point that out. One of the things that we talked about back here is there's sort of a flip side of this, and I think it's very true for women, and especially in women of color. It's this idea of not knowing what you're good at, or knowing what you're good at but not being willing to admit it in a space. It's sort of like when someone compliments you on something that you do, you take a step back and you're like, no. So we are very aware that people know what we suck at, but it's that we're really not willing to accept what we're good at, or talk or speak out in particular ways, and we don't know if it's cultural, if it's genderized, if it's whatever. But I just think that's another other side of this issue that we need to think about, and what makes someone a good systems leader, trying to figure that out and having that kind of emotional intelligence and understanding of that. So we talked a lot about that.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. That's really helpful. And for other leaders to be aware of that, you're right, the emotional intelligence to be able to recognize that. I mean, I got blind spots blowing up all behind me all the time, and I think it's, thank you for sharing that.
I always use the metaphor of the half-empty, half-full glass, and that every single one of us is both, right? We all have gifts and talents that make us great family members, friends, workers, leaders. That's our fullness. We also have our emptiness, the things we suck at, the regrets we have, the mistakes we've made. And it's the thing I shared earlier. I think it's so essential that we both be confident about our fullness, while also being honest and humble about our emptiness. If you're not confident and comfortable with your fullness, you can never be fully vulnerable and open on your emptiness. And so we have to operate at both levels to be effective. But the part about being really confident about what we're good at is essential to having, to be able to lead.
Yes, right here. Can we get a mic?
So there are a couple of things that came up that resonate with issues that we're dealing with right now. Two of the comments that you made about therapy and mean girls. So as you're bringing everybody around a table to talk about an effort that everyone is passionate about, is it the responsibility of either the backbone or the people involved to identify the mean girls and either sort of work therapeutically through, there's a reason why they have this perspective, but we need them at the table? Or when do you make the decision, this is an impediment to us moving forward with this issue, and we want the mean girl to go away? How do you navigate that?
That is a fabulous question. So, and I'll use the example in U-turn. In this particular, the particular example I referenced. First of all, you really have to ask yourself a question: is this individual representing an agency and/or constituency that is critical to our issue? Again, it's not about the person; it's about what they represent. If the answer is yes, they cannot go away. The next step of that is the backbone, which, in my opinion, the most effective backbones are invisible and behind the scenes. But there's someone whose job it is in that backbone agency to find out what's going on with you. Why is this coming up? It's the meeting before the meeting, right? It's the, let me make a phone call before. What's happening, this is what's gonna happen, the subject's gonna come up, it's gonna impact you, how are you gonna feel about that? Do we need to go out for a cocktail? A lot of cocktails. Do we need to go out for a cocktail? Do we need to talk it through? You have to know everything that's happening, the underlying currents in your collaborative, and the stories that are within every person in the collaborative. The person that's most dissonant is probably the most brilliant. And they have access to something and or someone that you need. The challenge for you is how do you deal with that? In this circumstance, I was just uncomfortable by her anger. And when I really examined it, like, this makes me, like, I don't know how to respond to somebody yelling at me. So I yelled back. Well, that just did not work out well. But she, to her credit, said, you know what, Stacy, let's both step back. I think there's something here. Will you go for a drink with me and let's talk? And I said, sure. And I'm a hotel bar kind of girl. She's not. So she said, well, I know this guy down the street. And I was like, oh, that's going to make me uncomfortable. What about the Four Seasons? But she said, if you want to get to know me, you're going to go where I go. And I did. And we're now traveling to Spain together on a biking trip. So I say that to say that there's something behind the story of the anger. And it's your job to figure out what it is and to help deconstruct it. And to be okay with it. I eventually got okay with the fact she was angry because it's what fueled the work she does as a child advocate. And now I respect it. I have the highest respect for it. And when she yells at me, I just yell back. And then she's like, okay. And then we can get to the work that matters. So I would not back away from it.
And then you go on vacation, she's going to get you the best hotel rates and everything. She'll go off on the, right up here.
So building on the naming it theme, we discussed two things. One is trying to figure out what you suck at that might be just a phase of time, as your journey building your capacity and not becoming too hard on yourself around that. And then the second is maybe not naming what you suck at, but naming among the group the assumptions that are underlying, that may be hidden, that are underlying some of the communications and interactions that I've found a lot of times with the group we're working with, that people are saying things that we don't, it's embedded are a lot of assumptions that may be informing that statement, and that we don't have those shared assumptions, which means we're just talking or operating cross purposes. So naming assumptions and making sure you're not naming the things that you don't really suck at, it's just a phase in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of different, I think there are different species of elephants that are in the room. And I think calling out the different ones is important. And I think that, one of those is the assumptions that we're all holding. One is the unspoken expectations. I mean, one of the ways that trust normally breaks down is that people are angry over slights because they held expectations that were never voiced to somebody and were never clear, and someone's not meeting unspoken expectations. And then that just becomes a vicious cycle. And then you've got the things right. There are things that groups have screwed up. There's things that have to do with like your learning and your process and your development, but you also haven't named we haven't talked about those issues. And so I think the main thing is the more uncomfortable topics in your group, the less likely you are to succeed. And I think the more you take all the conversations that you're afraid to have and actually have them, and it's the scariest thing to do, but it's also the most transformative thing you can do. Because most people I know, and most experiences I've been in, as terrified as I was to go in, I felt better. At the end, it became a much better experience. And so we gotta surface and talk about those issues, those assumptions, and just do activities. There's lots of different tools and activities to do these things. Get into the conversations about this stuff. Find out what the assumptions are. Have the conversation about what are the things we have done wrong, and what of those are timing, what of those are just capacity, and just name them. And then we all know, and we don't have to have those hidden views of each other.
One thing we were talking about was this idea of a story. So everybody in your collaborative has a story, right? They have an experience with the very issue that you were trying to solve. And that story creates a frame for them. Their frame is how they enter into the space, right? So if their story is negative, or their story is aggressive, or their story is passive, or their story is born out of a hurt, that's what they bring into the room. So part of the job of the background is to understand people's stories and to facilitate a process where people can share those stories in an appropriate context, because it is not appropriate to have therapy every time you get together. You're going to have to solve an issue. But there will be moments that you can create an informal dinner where your collaborative leaders can come together informally and share their stories. And if you're successful, people's stories begin to shift, right? The person that was as angry, they're not as angry. The person that was as hurt is willing to be more vulnerable. The person who was bright and shiny is willing to share some of their light. It's really this wonderful, beautiful process of evolution that happens within your community. But if you don't acknowledge the story, and you don't understand the story, you don't respect the story, then you're going to end up getting stuck.
Let me just spin that a little bit differently. One of my most frequent points of advice on collective impact is follow the energy, go where the energy is. So I want to separate things I suck at that I'm never going to get good at and I have no interest in, and the things that I may not think I'm very good at yet, but I have a tremendous amount of energy to get good at. Like having deep conversations among people. And I really want to help that happen, and I know that I need to continue to develop in that. So that's something where I would follow the energy, right? So if the energy says I may not be good at it yet, but I want to get good at it, go for that. If it says I'm not good at it and I never want to be good at it, let it go, right? So, great. Maybe we'll take one more observation or comment, and then I want to give Stacy and Paul a chance to wrap up. Well, let's just go to our two panelists. Any closing thoughts from the two of you?
I think that just in the theme of getting the bigger picture and elephants and systems is, the biggest elephant I think in every room is power. And I think if we're not talking about it, people are making assumptions about it, people are angry about it, and all sorts of other things. And it's a topic that we should be talking about in our efforts. And because to get to a transformative space, we have to be okay with what the power dynamics are in the room. And we have to name them. And we have to be aware of them. And we have to be aware, are there ways decisions are made other than in the room? Just to name all of that. And I think it's one of the hard things. And the other thing that I think that folks can do as funders or backbone leaders is find ways to take the most powerful and least powerful in an institutional sense people out to dinner together. and start to share those stories and build those relationships. What often happens is the more powerful, larger institutional leaders all hang out together, and the more grassroots and less institutional leaders get together. And you start to see that division, and there's not a lot of effort to cross that. And it's not going to cross 10 on 10, it's going to cross 1 by 1. And so think about ways that you can create those linkages, have those conversations, and start to build relationships and understanding that crosses that, so people understand their stories and assumptions and things. But I think that calling on that issue is an issue that if you can get comfortable, because you can't eliminate power dynamics, you can only mitigate them. Because power is real and it exists. But if you can mitigate it to a certain extent, you create a much more healthy environment to move to the kind of conversation and transformation necessary.
I would first say thank you. I think people deciding to enter into the space of systems transformation, it is a bold and courageous move to make. And it's often a very thankless position. So I think it is important that you thought it not robbery to spend time perfecting your craft and coming here and learning more. I would say in parting, there's 3 basic things to potentially remember. One, remember it is not about you. It really is about your issue, your community, and more importantly, how the world will be different if you solve this very thing. The second is, as the leader, if you model behavior change, your energy will attract others, and that behavior change can now just become a way of moving through the world. It doesn't have to be as hard as we humans have made it. And the third is be humbly curious. Continue to ask why. Continue to find individuals and create a community that are very interested in the very issue you're interested in, and get to know them. They will be with you forever. And that community is comprised of people who are elders. I am fascinated and love elders because inevitably the very thing you're trying to solve, they've seen. And if you're patient enough to listen to the stories and get down in the 1928 experience they had, there's some nugget that's going to help you right now, and the community needs that. And then you got to bring forward the youngins. We are not going to be here forever, so you got to build a generation behind us who value this way of working, and it becomes the norm and not the struggle. And there's a word in Yoruba that, and the word is Madayase, which means that I lay at your feet. The work that you do, you're laying at the feet of the very people you serve. It is really critical for us to remember that as a community.
Wow. So in a moment, we're going to bring up Robert Albright, who will lead us into break and into the rest of the day. But I have to say, this is it's been a wonderful session, and thank you both for sharing your wisdom. I feel like I've learned a lot in this short period of time. So if you could join me in thanking our